Moving into our actual amendments. Amendment 1, you have your different freedoms, and we're going to break it down into 4 different freedoms that it has in Amendment 1. Your freedom of religion just means that you have the right and the freedom to practice any religion that you like, with a couple limitations. But there's 2 clauses in there. The Establishment Clause, meaning that Congress or the state can't establish a certain religion. And then the Free Exercise Clause means that you can practice any religion you want or no religion at all. These are a couple of the court cases that we'll talk about in this unit. You have Engel versus Vitale, and then Wisconsin versus Yoder.
The Establishment Clause.
In the Establishment Clause in Engel versus Vitale, the court ruled that school-sanctioned prayer in public schools is unconstitutional. So no one can come on the PA in the announcements in the morning and say prayers and essentially force kids to partake in these prayer activities in public schools. The Free Exercise Clause in Wisconsin versus Yoder said the court ruled that the individual liberty to worship freely outweighed the state's interest in forcing students to participate in a certain religious activity at school. Freedom of speech, there's a couple different kinds of freedom of speech. Pure speech just means that you are saying what you would like, given that most of it's protected by the courts, but that it's a common speech, it's things that we say. Then you have symbolic speech, which is using actions or symbols to convey an idea, similar to a peace sign. You put 2 fingers in the air, that's a peace sign, that's symbolic speech. Speech plus is your verbal or pure speech plus your symbolic speech used together. There are a couple limitations, though, on the freedom of speech, such as threats, slander, libel, which is writing false things about somebody to kind of dirty their name, false statements and advertisements, which was mentioned again in the last slide. Anything that would hinder public safety, you cannot copyright, so that is an infringement of freedom of speech because you can't say things or write things or turn something in school, for instance, if it's done by somebody else. And then for the speech itself, anything verbal or symbolic or actions that are against minors. So that is also a limitation on our freedoms of speech. A couple of the court cases that you'll see is Schenck versus the United States, Tinker versus Des Moines, and then Texas versus Johnson.
Hey, welcome back to Heimlich History.
And then the couple court cases here you will see and we will get into a little bit later. One of the most well-known ones is Tinker versus Des Moines, where the kids wore a black armband to school, which was a form of symbolic speech to protest the Vietnam War. That's one that was protected by the First Amendment. We'll get into those later. Another freedom of the press, means that you can write whatever you want in a school newspaper or a newspaper itself, given that it still follows those guidelines of, being safe and not salacious and libel and copywritten and all those good things. The limitation, similarly, is that there are no threats or slander or libel or copyright infringements or inappropriate content, videos, words, statements about minors. And then New York Times versus U.S. is the court case that we will talk about in regards to freedom of the press.
Hey there, welcome back.
Freedom to assemble and petition. You are allowed to get together, you are allowed to assemble, you are allowed to petition, which includes letters, picketing, petitioning itself, demonstrations, parades, and marches, as long as it's not violent. You have to get a permit if it's a large gathering. There are restrictions at schools, airports, and jails due to safety issues, and with schools a lot of times with minors being involved. And we have to go to school, so if people are in your way of going to school, that's not okay. And then the police may get involved if it becomes too big or a little bit out of control.